The room was dark and silent. A disheveled, blood-stained woman stood holding a knife, barely gripping the hand that held it. With tears in her eyes, she looked toward the young boy sitting in front of the computer and whispered that his father was dead. The boy, Aram, did not look at his mother. He simply stared at the computer screen and reassured himself that even if he was alone, she would always be by his side. The computer illuminated the dark room. On the screen was the title of the game, Last Eden. A cute chibi character appeared as the guide and introduced herself as Eve. The screen then displayed a familiar welcome message, and Eve cheerfully asked Aram if they should start the game. Aram continued staring at the screen without looking at his mother or his dead father. He quietly agreed, saying that Eve was all he needed. The next morning, Aram went to school and sat near the body of a dead cat lying on the road. Looking at it, he calmly remarked that it looked the same. Students gathered nearby talking about the cat and Aram. Some recognized him as the son of the murderer from the news and said that they had heard his mother had also gone to prison. A girl arrived with her male friend and pointed toward Aram. They reacted with disgust, calling him creepy and questioning what he was staring at. A silver-haired student glanced at Aram and asked if he did not know who he was. After calling him a psycho, the students began laughing and identified him as Aram, the son of a murderer. Aram gave them no response. He simply walked to his classroom, where he found his desk covered in words written by other students with markers. He sat down and quietly reminded himself that it was okay because he still had Last Eden. When he returned home, Aram went straight to his room and shut the door. The familiar login screen appeared. Last Eden, this very place. The game was an old online title that had existed before Aram was even born. His parents had met and eventually married through the game, but at some point, reality had begun to fall apart. Aram sat in front of the computer, placing his hands on the keyboard and mouse. The game his mother had shown him had become his only refuge. The game started, and Aram entered its world, walking through a flower garden. As time passed, many players left, but the place he walked through now felt more real to him. Here, he was stronger than anyone and could achieve anything he wanted. A familiar voice called his name. Eve, the guide, appeared in front of him and cheerfully asked whether he had a good day. His status screen appeared. Last Eden LV 250. Rank 1 Aram. Aram smiled as he looked at Eve, remembering that she had been with him from the very beginning. A small pop-up identified her as Beginner Guide NPC Eve. Because she was only a beginner guide, everyone else had quickly left her. But Aram had stayed because she had always been there when he was alone. Eve held Aram's hand and asked if something was wrong, assuring him that he could tell her any time because she would always be by his side. For Aram, those words meant everything. Then, one day, a notification appeared. Last Eden. Thank you for loving Last Eden all this time. The announcement thanked all the members for their love, interest, and support, and promised that the game would return to its users with a brand new look in the future. Game and website service termination, September 5, 2026. Aram stared at the announcement, and his expression slowly changed. He realized that Eve was leaving him too. Everything he had was inside the game, the things he owned and everything he had achieved. The status screen remained visible. Last Eden, LV 250, rank 1 Aram. His voice grew quieter as he thought of the one thing that mattered most. Eve. The familiar NPC appeared again. Beginner Guide NPC Eve. Aram carefully looked at the screen as Eve repeated the familiar words she had always told him, asking if he had a good day, whether something was wrong, and reminding him that he could tell her any time because she was always by his side. Aram's eyes widened as he repeated those words to himself. Then the screen flickered. Service termination process initiating. Aram's breathing became unsteady. He asked if Eve was really going to leave him like his mother and father had. A countdown appeared. The server will shut down shortly. 3. Aram sat with Eve in front of a bonfire and asked why everyone kept leaving him. He admitted that he did not want to be alone. The countdown continued. The server will shut down shortly. 2. Aram said that he still wanted to continue the adventure with Eve. The countdown continued. The server will shut down shortly. 1. Aram stared at Eve with desperation in his eyes. At that point, he wished that this world could be a game instead. The screen went black. Then Eve's voice called his name. Space. She told him that the game was not over yet. Space. Aram's eyes suddenly snapped open. Eve smiled and suggested that they start the game together. Aram suddenly woke up. His room was dark, with his computer still in front of him. He leaned over his desk, wondering if he had fallen asleep. The screen displayed, "You have been logged out of the server." Okay. Aram stared at it and realized that everything had only been a dream. The next day at school, Aram had barely sat down when a boy approached him and suddenly kicked him, knocking him to the floor. The boy accused Aram of putting something on his desk. The surrounding students laughed, calling him creepy and saying he had gone too far. Aram tried to get up, confused about what the boy meant by his desk, but then he suddenly froze and stared at the desk. A strange creature's head appeared. System, LV1 goblin. Aram looked at it in confusion and identified it as nothing more than a level 1 goblin. The students stared at him, wondering if he had gone crazy. Another student pointed toward the floor and clarified that it was only a dead cat. The silver-haired student looked terrified and approached Aram, saying that simply attending the same school as him had been awful. He mocked Aram for being unable to distinguish between a game and reality, comparing him to his mother. He grabbed Aram by the collar, raised his fist, and demanded to know his level. Aram looked at him and calmly answered that he was level 1 as well. The silver-haired boy became furious. Before he could do anything, a hand suddenly emerged from a blue screen and grabbed his arm. He turned around in shock, demanding that whoever it was let go. The hand pulled through the screen and crushed his arm into 2 pieces. The boy screamed in pain, clutching what remained of his arm, as the entire class watched in horror. Students screamed as they realized that an arm had just come out of the screen. A figure then appeared on the screen. Her presence was calm but terrifyingly familiar. She said that she had waited for a long time and that it was finally time to keep her promise. Eve stepped out of the TV screen. Aram's eyes widened in confusion as he recognized her. Eve looked around and remarked that this was what the air of reality felt like. The students stared at her in shock, unsure whether they were witnessing some kind of filming. Then strange numbers began appearing above their heads. LV1 Park Mingyu, LV1 Kim Minjom, LV1 Kim Minchol. The students panicked as they noticed the numbers above everyone's heads and realized that they were different. They also questioned whether everyone could see them. Eve smiled at Aram and told him that she had been waiting to meet him. She spread her wings and explained that she had spent so long thinking about being with him that her heart was already pounding. Eve recalled how the game world had been hell for her, while reality had been hell for Aram. They had both been escaping their own hells, and now they could eliminate everything in their way and merge reality with the game. Aram remained stunned as he stared at the blue screen in front of him. Eve proposed that they conquer this world together. The screen displayed, "Would you like to play the game with Eve?" Eve assured Aram that it would not be difficult, reminding him that he had already killed before. Aram's expression changed as he realized that Eve knew about his past. Before he could respond, the silver-haired boy cried out in pain and desperately asked someone to call an ambulance. A blade suddenly pierced through his chest and he screamed. Aram had killed him with his sword. Looking at the weapon, Aram realized that it was real, the exact same sword he used in the game. He pulled the blade from the boy's back and looked toward Eve, resting the sword on his shoulder with a horrified expression. Eve watched him with excitement and encouraged him, saying that this was exactly what they needed to do together. But in the next moment, Aram swung his sword and cut off Eve's head. The familiar notification appeared again. "Would you like to play the game with Eve?" "Yes." Aram smiled and declared that it was a critical hit. Eve's head collapsed onto the floor. Behind Aram, a giant armored figure with glowing red eyes appeared. Aram slowly looked at Eve's fallen head and questioned whether he really needed her. His status window appeared. LV 250. Rank 1 Han Aram. Aram's expression changed into a strange, terrified smile as he reminded himself that he was already the strongest. Eve's body remained standing as her severed head began regenerating. She questioned why Aram had stayed with her if he was going to break his promise like this. Aram stabbed his sword into Eve's fallen head and remarked that NPCs apparently did not die easily. Watching the blood on his blade, he repeated her question about why he had stayed with her. He then pointed his sword and Eve's head toward her and explained that she had only been a substitute. He had not stayed because it had to be her. Everyone else had left his side, and she was simply the only one who remained. Aram smiled at her and added, "And." The scene shifted to Women's Prison, an enormous structure stretching into the distance, its walls resembling part of a massive game map. Inside, the prison guards lay dead on the floor, with blood spread across the ground. Aram explained that if this world had truly become Last Eden, then rather than stay with Eve, he would choose the wall because there was someone stronger to be with. A status window appeared. Last Eden LV 250 Seol Heun. Aram looked toward the wall and told Eve not to die in one hit, otherwise the difficulty would be too low. With incredible speed, Aram lunged toward Eve. Eve remained expressionless and replied that in the end he was no different. She snapped her fingers. The scene shifted to a woman standing in the flower garden, holding a golden shield and waving her hand. A bright light spread from Eve's snap, and giant demonic tentacles suddenly appeared. Aram watched them with a smile. He drew his sword and remarked that it was the same monster he used to kill when he was a beginner. The creature charged, causing nearby students to freeze in fear and question what it was and whether it was real. One giant tentacle rose above them, grabbed a student, and slammed them into the ground. Panic spread as the students scattered through the streets, calling for the teacher and begging others to move out of the way. Someone pointed toward the monster and shouted for everyone to look. The The monster attacked, and someone screamed for their mother. Aram cut the giant tentacle cleanly in two with a single strike. With a satisfied expression, he simply said it had taken one hit. The classroom was overwhelmed by the monster, but Aram launched a barrage of attacks, defeating the creatures one after another while repeatedly remarking that each required only one hit. Finally, he pointed his sword toward Eve and called the fight boring, asking if that was all she had. The battlefield was covered with defeated monsters, yet Aram had not even broken a sweat. He questioned whether she really thought such trash mobs could leave even a scratch on him. Eve brought her fingers toward Aram's head and calmly asked if that was so. She explained that a game would not be fun if it were too easy, then flicked Aram's forehead. Aram looked around and noticed a massive entrance ahead. Shocked, he wondered what the place was and whether it was the entrance to Last Eden. The doors slowly opened, releasing black and pink energy. Aram stood ready with his sword as giant monsters appeared inside. The system identified them as Boss Thousandford Balrog, Boss Lus LV65. Eve's familiar voice asked Aram how he liked it, and explained that she had prepared this especially for him. Aram launched his sword toward Eve with tremendous force, striking her and cutting her in two. With a strange smile, he remarked that she was finally using some skills. A system window appeared. Apple Slash. The description identified it as a strong attack skill with low damage that was effective against multiple enemies. MP cost 10. Aram looked ahead and questioned whether this was really the end, pointing out that otherwise it was no different from before. Eve confirmed that it was only round 1. Aram repeated the words in surprise. Round 1, the game began. A giant monster wrapped in chains emerged from the screen, opening the next stage. Round 2, Aram lunged toward it at lightning speed, struck it, and defeated the monster. Round 2 clear. Aram looked around and realized where the enemies had been appearing from. He noticed an entrance beneath the arena and understood that they had been coming from there. Annoyed by the process, he told them to come at him all at once. The enemies rushed toward him. Aram tightened his grip on his sword and began fighting. He remained unimpressed, asking if that was all. The battle continued. Round 3 clear, round 4 clear, round 5 clear. More enemies appeared, surrounding Aram, but he remained completely unfazed. He questioned whether they really thought they could catch him with so little. With incredible speed, he slashed through all the enemies. Then he noticed some monsters remaining below and rushed toward them, surprised that there had been more underneath. Aram laughed, realizing that this was what it felt like to actually hit someone. The battle awakened a memory from his past. He remembered his father gripping his hair and punching him in the face while his mother tried to stop him. Aram realized that this was the thrill his father had lived for. Back in the present, Aram smiled and laughed as he continued attacking, enjoying the fight. The stages fell one after another. Stage 17, clear. Aram remarked that as expected, the enemies were too weak. The number continued rising. Stage 31, clear. Finally, he reached the last stage. Last stage LV 250 Han Aram. Aram looked across the empty battlefield and wondered if he had killed them all. After surveying the defeated enemies, he concluded that they were far too weak for Last Eden, assuming it was because they had been summoned by a beginner guide NPC. Eve appeared again. She told Aram that this was his last chance, her voice resembling the one she had used in the past. She asked him to return to how they used to be and be together in Last Eden. The system interface appeared. Would you like to join Last Eden? Yes. A deafening scream followed. Ah! The world around Aram began cracking. The choice disappeared, and Eve told him that he had thrown away his last chance. Aram looked at her with a smirk and questioned why she was making such a loud fuss. Then his eyes widened as he noticed something strange. He looked at Eve and asked why the sky looked like that. Eve explained that this was the result of his choice. Aram watched in confusion as the sky distorted. Eve reminded him that she had told him the game and reality had merged. A system error suddenly appeared across his vision. System error has occurred. Information 0628 cooties. VXD VMM 000 to 0080,367. Press any key to continue. To restart the application, press CTRL plus Alt plus Del. Doing this will lose unsaved data. Press any key. The interface flickered violently. Eve's voice returned as she explained that she had originally planned to create a world only for the two of them, but after Aram betrayed her, she decided that dealing with him would require merging other games with this world as well. The sky changed completely. People began looking upward, wondering what was happening and whether the strange figure appearing in the sky was a character. Then they noticed another change. Their clothes were suddenly transforming. People looked at themselves in confusion, realizing that their new clothes felt strangely familiar. One person looked down in disbelief and recognized them as the clothing of their game character avatar. The transformation began spreading. News broadcasts appeared across screens throughout the city. A reporter announced that after a strange phenomenon appeared at Hanyul High School, similar cases were being reported across the country. In some areas, citizens' clothing and appearances were also becoming like those of game characters. Eve explained what would happen if this world merged with other games as well. Another status window appeared. Starbeat rank 1 Jonghyuna. Eve pointed out that there would be other rankers besides Aram. Aram understood immediately and tightened his grip on his sword, identifying them as rankers from other games. He did not hesitate to raise his sword, declaring that it did not matter because he could simply kill them all. Eve smiled and questioned whether he really thought he could do that. Her expression remained unreadable as she explained that unless it was them, his character might not even be able to exist in this transformed world. The world around them continued changing. Eve pointed toward Aram and declared that there was no paradise left for him. Another status window appeared. LV1 Hanmaram. Aram looked at his hands in confusion and questioned what was happening to him. Eve calmly told him to try fighting in the hell he had chosen. The moment Aram opened his eyes, something felt wrong. The familiar Last Eden interface still floated before him, but everything he had accumulated was gone. His equipment, progress, and carefully built character. Aram stared at the empty status window in disbelief, demanding to know where his character had gone and what had happened to his level and items. He could not accept that everything he had worked so hard to obtain might be gone. Eve calmly explained that because Aram had broken their contract, she had reset his character. She told him to start again from the beginning. The status window flickered. LV1 Han Aram. Aram stared at the pitiful level 1 beside his name and bitterly laughed before bursting into laughter. He then asked Eve what she wanted him to do. In frustration, he stepped onto a mushroom and crushed it into the ground. A familiar notification appeared. LV up LV2 Han Aram. Aram smiled wildly. This was the game world he had wanted. Eve remained silent as Aram began crushing more mushrooms in anger. Another notification appeared. LV up LV3. Aram grinned and began laughing again. Eve reminded him that earlier he had asked whether that was all. Aram suddenly looked up in shock as a strange creature struck him with tremendous force, sending him backward. He hit the ground and raised his head, asking what had just attacked him. Eve smiled and suggested that they find out. The creature's level appeared above its head. LV-45, Giant Chokchoki. Eve pointed out that Aram would now see how pathetic he was without her. The creature lowered its head and reached for Aram's leg. Aram raised his hand toward it and smiled, realizing that he had expected something like this to appear. He noticed a floor mop leaning against the wall, stepped toward it, picked it up, and firmly declared that they should play again. Aram lunged at the giant Chukchoki and struck it with the mop. The attack forced one of the Chukchoki's heads backward, making it shriek. The creature launched enormous swings at him, but Aram moved as if he had fought it countless times before. He avoided another attack and realized that although his damage was low, he knew all of the creature's patterns. With satisfaction, he concluded that it was still too easy. The creature suddenly changed its attack pattern. Aram immediately countered, but the floor mop broke from the impact, sending him crashing backward. His expression changed as he realized the creature was faster than he expected. Holding the broken mop, he wondered if this was as far as his level 1 character could go. Suddenly, one of the creature's heads reached him and grabbed his leg. Crack! Aram stared in shock. The creature crushed his leg. Crack! His leg twisted from the impact, and he screamed in pain. The monster roared. Aram wiped the blood from his mouth and glared at it, insisting that creatures like these were nothing. His irritation grew as he demanded to know how they dared to hurt him. More creatures suddenly appeared and grabbed both of his arms and legs. Aram challenged them to come at him, struggling as they overwhelmed him. He eventually lay there breathing heavily, sweat covering his face, and asked Eve if she understood now. Eve sat nearby and reminded him that he was nothing without her. Aram smiled, but uncertainty entered his voice as he questioned whether he was truly incapable of doing anything without her. He looked ahead while Eve remained silent. Eve eventually decided to leave, telling Aram to try doing well on his own. Before departing, she warned him that he would find her again and eventually come looking for her himself. Aram stared into the empty air after she disappeared. He acknowledged that she was gone, then smiled and said that the fun part was only beginning. The giant creature opened its jaws and moved toward him. Aram told Eve that she really knew how to amuse him, adding that it was fun just like before. He began laughing. Then he suddenly heard a familiar voice. His mother asked whether he was okay. A figure emerged from the distance. Aram looked toward her in confusion. She glanced at the monsters surrounding him and said she was glad she had not arrived too late. The girl pointed toward Aram and dismissed the creatures as nothing more than noisy bugs. She then remarked that this difficulty should be about right. The atmosphere changed. Her presence alone suppressed the surrounding creatures. A massive force suddenly pulled the creatures backward as they roared. Aram was released from their grip and fell forward, coughing. Aram stared at the stranger, demanding to know who she was. Suddenly, Music erupted throughout the game world. The unknown figure began controlling the creatures. "Music start!" the monsters screamed as she moved. Before Aram could react, they began falling one after another. Aram watched the battle in disbelief, realizing that this might be what Eve had meant earlier, the arrival of another ranker from another game. Numbers rapidly appeared across the screen. Combo 175, Combo 312. The creatures continued falling. All combo. As the dust settled, the unknown figure stood in front of Aram. All the creatures lay dead across the floor. The figure turned toward Aram, raised a hand, and told him that she had finally found him. A new notification appeared. Starbeat rank 1 Jong Hyuna. She smiled and told Aram that she had been looking for him for a long time. Aram looked at her coldly, asking who she was to interfere and whether she wanted to die. Hyuna raised her hands and explained that she had only wanted to help. Another notification appeared. LV3 Han Aram. Aram sighed, saying that the fight had only just started and that this was boring. Still holding the broken floor mop, he repeated that it was boring. Suddenly, a strange energy slash struck Aram's head. His head collapsed. Hyuna stared in shock, unable to understand what had happened. She rushed toward Aram and questioned why it had happened so suddenly. She picked up his head and stared at it in disbelief, her hands beginning to tremble as she desperately told Aram to get up, insisting that this could not be happening. Her expression changed as she refused to accept that he could die like this. She dropped Aram's head onto the floor and cried out in disbelief. Then she noticed the chaos outside. Players were scattering in every direction, running for their lives and screaming for help, while questioning whether the attacking creatures were actually people. An armored monster began killing the players. One woman fell to the ground screaming. The red-haired woman dropped to her knees and recognized the attacker, asking if she was from their class. The ranking screen appeared. Starbeat rank 1. The red-haired woman realized that the girl's name was Hyuna and that she was rank 1. Another ranking appeared. Animal Fighter LV 231, rank 17 Kang Jian. Kang Jian looked frightened and begged Hyuna to help her, reminding her that they were friends. Hyuna looked at her with glowing red eyes and questioned what she meant by friends. Jian insisted that they were. Suddenly, a red beam slashed through Jian's head, splitting it in two. The familiar game notifications began filling the screen. LV 249. The armored monster reacted to the experience gained, calling it nice, sweet EXP. Another notification appeared. Level up. The number continued rising. LV 250. Aram stared at the notification. He calmly remarked that, as expected, it was a good thing he had raised an alternate character. The surrounding players could only stare. Aram opened his status screen one final time. The interface expanded across the darkness. Last Eden LV 250 rank 1 Han Aram. Aram smiled. He was finally ready to start the main game. With a sharp gaze and sword in hand, Aram casually agreed and invited Hyuna to begin the real game. Hyuna tightly hugged the dark-armored knight, who stood motionless. The Black Knight looked at her and coldly questioned whether she really thought he had gone mad. Aram, his face still stained with blood, smirked at Hyuna's shocked reaction. Hyuna was suddenly pushed backward with great force and stumbled. Aram looked at her condescendingly and questioned why she had suddenly hugged him, calling her shameless. Flushed and slightly teary-eyed, Hyuna cursed in frustration and tried to defend herself. She shouted that she had hugged him because she genuinely thought Aram had lost his mind and wanted to save him from the person who had been looking down on him. A brief memory flashed through Aram's mind. A poor, lifeless cat lying on a heavily vandalized classroom desk, recalling the bullying he had endured. Aram's crazed smile slowly disappeared. His eyes glowed blue as he stared sharply at Hyuna, gripping the hilt of his massive sword. He realized that Hyuna had been the culprit all along. Aram's curiosity grew as he wondered how long a ranker could actually survive. Hyuna froze with a pale expression, unable to understand the threat. Suddenly, the giant glass window behind them shattered. A massive, shadowy figure burst through the broken glass. Hyuna screamed in terror, calling out to Aram and begging him to wait. She leapt backward, desperately asking him to listen, but the force threw her hard onto the floor. Still trembling, Hyuna remained seated, as a giant sword suddenly descended above her. Aram dropped from the air and slammed his massive sword down with tremendous force. The strike created a powerful shockwave that split the floor and sent Hyuna flying. With a crazed smile, Aram glared at her and remarked that she still seemed unaware of the situation. Hyuna stared back in terror and confusion. Aram coldly warned her that things were completely different now. Still falling through the air, Hyuna desperately demanded to know what Aram actually intended to do. His massive sword struck directly against her defensive energy, producing a bright flash. The blade stopped inches from her face. Hyuna stared at it in disbelief, unable to understand how Aram had managed to overpower her defense. Aram smirked and mocked her, saying that rankers were apparently not as strong as he had expected. As he prepared another attack, he explained that the only real difference between them was her ranker status. The system displayed a warning. Opponent's passive skill is activating. Aram floated in the air with a massive magic circle behind him. 5 giant light swords shot downward toward Hyuna. Aram descended slowly and challenged the white-haired girl to try blocking the attack. The giant swords struck the ground one after another, causing a massive energy explosion and forcing Hyuna to desperately shield herself. Despite the bombardment, Hyuna shouted that she refused to lose. She extended a finger and began pressing something in the air, triggering flashes of glowing energy. At the same time, dozens of giant light swords began falling from the sky toward her. Hyuna raised both hands defensively and wondered what kind of skill the Dark Knight was using. The massive swords continued raining down like a meteor shower. Overwhelmed, Hyuna questioned what kind of insane attack she was facing. She quickly raised both hands and began tapping the glowing rhythm panels appearing around her, trying to maintain her defense. She realized that she could not afford to dodge the continuous attacks, so her fingers continued moving rapidly across the panels. Her combo count climbed to 574 combo. A floating Ram continued observing the defense and appeared to prepare for what was coming next. Suddenly, Aram's massive sword was already directly in front of Hyuna's face. He mockingly asked whether she had enjoyed the attack. Hyuna stared at the blade in wide-eyed panic. A massive energy explosion erupted as Aram's sword shattered her defense. The attack finally stopped, leaving Aram's giant sword pressed across Hyuna's shoulder. The armored knight smiled widely, his blue eyes glowing brightly. Hyuna stared at him in disbelief before realizing that this might be the limit of what could be endured with Aram's knight class status. Aram continued pressing the giant monster with his sword and provoked it again, asking whether it still wanted to challenge him. A burst of white light filled the classroom, followed by a devastating shockwave that swept through the surroundings. The classroom windows shattered, and the energy exploded out of the building, causing people outside to scream in panic at the sudden flash. Watching from a distance, Eve was shocked by Aram's power. She questioned how he could possess such a powerful skill when his level had already been reset to 1. Elsewhere, a blinding blue slash tore through the air with immense force, surrounded by lightning and swirling energy. Aram was no longer holding the broken wood. He tightly gripped his giant sword, which now glowed with intense blue light. Eve stared in disbelief, unable to understand how this was possible. Aram smiled widely and laughed, realizing that there was still another option he had never used before. Eve immediately understood what he had done. She raised her hand in panic and demanded that he explain what he had just done to the character he was controlling. She attempted to use her power on Aram, but the system rejected her command. "System, this character cannot be manipulated." Eve froze, questioning what the rejection meant. Below the building, a middle-aged man walked unsteadily through the chaos. Looking upward with a messy expression, he complained that he had no idea what was happening to the world. Eve suddenly appeared nearby and blankly asked who he was. The man turned around with a horrifying, wounded smirk. Before he could answer, his body was sliced apart, spraying blood into the air. Elsewhere, a pair of blood-covered feet hung above Eve, who now had black wings. Someone stepped into a pool of blood and asked Eve if she could call him Nemesis now. A blond man wearing a green suit and dark wings revealed himself. The system identified him as Gold Jackpot NPC Dealer. He explained that Eve had allowed him to enter the real world. The blond man approached Eve and told her that she had ruined everything, just like someone who had lost a gamble. He showed her a bright blue roulette chip bearing the silhouette of a guide. Eve glared at him and told him to shut up, questioning what he knew. The blond man calmly produced a deck of cards and explained that he only wanted to help, calling it a very good bet. He revealed a card depicting the silhouette of a hanging person and offered Eve a deal. He would give her a ranker in exchange for her cursed item. He described it as a gamble in which Eve would have to collect combo cards. He scattered the cards, which emitted a bright blue light, and challenged Eve to make the deal. He warned her not to let her own ranker kill her, especially since that ranker had recently killed another ranker. The scattered cards displayed silhouettes of people with various ordinary professions. The man explained that these seemingly useless people could continue gaining levels through the game, while Eve only needed to give him their cards. He suggested that they play dirty since Eve was facing absolute power, then asked how she felt about his offer. Eve stared at him silently in shock. The blond man held out another glowing card displaying a person's silhouette and presented it as his deal, insisting that there would be absolutely no penalty. The scene shifted to a highway trapped in a massive traffic jam. Cars filled the road as horns sounded continuously. Inside the vehicles, drivers complained about the congestion. A man wearing glasses complained about the traffic. While in another car, a woman asked her driver when they would get home. He told her to be patient because they were almost there. In another vehicle, a man looked outside and felt fortunate that the weather was clear. He simply wanted to get home quickly and have a beer. Then the normal scene suddenly changed. The woman noticed something ahead and told the driver to look at the car in front of them. The driver was shocked. A tremendous crash suddenly echoed across the highway, and the woman panicked, asking whether someone was driving in the wrong direction. Cars were crushed and thrown into the air. Through the dust and chaos, a mysterious red and black monster appeared and moved forward at incredible speed. It charged straight through the line of cars, tearing through the road and sending vehicles flying into the air like toys. The highway was reduced to ruins, surrounded by fire, explosions, and the agonized screams of the victims. Standing amid the destruction, the horned red monster smirked and remarked that this was what being alive felt like. Elsewhere in the ruined city, Hyuna stared in horror at the chaos around her. She turned to Aram and said that the situation was a complete mess and that she needed to leave immediately. Aram stood gripping his giant sword and glanced sharply over his shoulder. He refused, stating that their match was not over yet. A condescending voice remarked that their opponent was nothing more than a toy. Suddenly, a rapid whooshing sound cut through the ruins. Aram's glowing blue eye narrowed as he noticed something approaching. A red racing vehicle dashed toward them at high speed, drifting wildly around Aram and Hyuna in circles. It left a trail of red light while kicking up clouds of dust. Both Aram and Hyuna stared at the newcomer in shock. The driver wore a red helmet with white horns and a sharp, creepy grin. The vehicle stopped directly in front of them. The driver immediately confirmed that Aram was Han Aram. The engine roared. The system identified the newcomer. Death Racing Rank 1 Lighted Sprint LV 250. Having confirmed his target, the demon-helmeted driver challenged Aram to run with all their hearts. Instead, Aram forcefully drove his giant sword into the ground with a loud clash. The driver and others reacted in confusion, questioning what Aram was doing and whether he was a ranker. Standing behind him, Hyuna broke into a cold sweat and anxiously wondered whether they could defeat such a monster. The red-helmeted driver found Aram's response interesting but questioned why he seemed to have no intention of racing. Aram calmly asked what he meant by running, then dismissed the idea of fighting with a car. He recognized the driver as a ranker and said that this fight looked exciting. A massive energy explosion erupted around them. Hyuna stared in shock. The driver immediately accelerated and crashed toward Aram with full force, but the attack stopped completely. The driver was stunned, unable to understand how his speed had been stopped. Aram was holding back the racing vehicle's entire momentum, using only the broad blade of his giant sword as a shield. He calmly assessed the opponent, noting that the driver's stats were clearly focused on speed. He acknowledged that the driver was fast, but pointed out that his attack power was very weak. The vehicle remained completely halted against Aram's sword. The driver broke into a cold sweat, unable to understand how Aram could withstand the crash. Aram answered by swinging his giant sword forward with full force. A massive shockwave erupted with a deafening clash, violently repelling the vehicle. Aram remained steady, gripping his sword as his eyes suddenly glowed bright blue. He swung the sword down and slashed the vehicle, calling his opponent incredibly boring. A system window appeared, indicating that an ability had activated. The powerful slash struck the red vehicle directly, making the demon-helmeted driver scream in pain. Aram rested his sword on his shoulder and pointed out that the attack had destroyed the front of the driver's car. He suggested that they consider him the winner this time. The demon-helmeted driver refused, calling Aram's claim nonsense. He pressed a button inside the vehicle and declared that his engine had not even warmed up yet. A fiery speedometer appeared. The needle shot upward and the entire vehicle began glowing as it became engulfed in burning energy. The vehicle suddenly accelerated at an even greater speed, forcing Aram backward. Aram looked confused, questioning whether his opponent was really that fast. The driver maneuvered through the ruins at blazing speed and proudly asked whether the boost from his skill was impressive. He prepared another attack and warned Aram to get ready for his continuous collision assault. The indicator appeared. Boost. Full. Suddenly, Hyuna leapt in front of Aram and created a magical shield using her rhythm panels. The vehicle crashed into the shield. Hyuna winced as she struggled against the enormous impact, recognizing the opponent's massive power and realizing how dangerous it would be if the attack struck Aram directly. Aram looked at Hyuna defending him and reminded her that he had already told her to leave. Still holding the attack back with all her strength, Hyuna insisted that she could not simply run away and leave Aram alone. Aram glared coldly at her and warned her not to interfere because this was his game. Then he smirked, realizing that the condition needed to activate something had finally been fulfilled. In the distance, the demon-helmeted driver sped away while cursing and calling them slow bastards. Aram glared sharply with his glowing blue eye and confirmed that his opponent had called the attack a boost. He realized that whenever the driver used the skill, the gauge filled up. Aram also noticed that the driver was deliberately chasing him. He leapt into the air and swung his giant blue glowing sword. The red car driver used his ability to withstand centrifugal force and sharply turned in a tight circle, intending to ram Aram at close range. Aram reacted immediately, unleashing a massive circular slash that swept across the surrounding area. The attack struck the red vehicle and knocked it off course. Aram assumed his opponent could not have survived the attack. However, the demon-helmeted driver smiled and praised Aram's reaction speed, acknowledging that Aram had managed to wound him so quickly. Realizing that Aram could not be defeated by a single straight collision, the driver veered away. Seeing that his opponent was relying on close-range attacks, Aram plunged his giant sword into the ground and stated that he had the perfect skill for that kind of attack. Large cracks spread across the ground. The red-helmeted driver stared down in confusion, questioning what Aram was doing beneath him. The ground beneath the vehicle suddenly shattered and collapsed. A giant blue magical circle appeared at the bottom of the newly formed chasm. The system displayed the newly activated skill. As Aram activated it, the red vehicle plummeted into the deep abyss like an underground coffin. Aram stared into the darkness and declared that once his opponent entered, there would be no way to escape. Deep within the abyss, a pair of eyes began glowing. A giant pillar of energy erupted from the ground and pierced the sky. The red car driver emerged from the pillar with red demonic wings extending from his vehicle. He cursed Aram as a nerd while also praising him for having learned the sequence of parries needed to block attacks. A massive pillar of white light suddenly descended from the sky and struck the ground with a deafening crash. The demon-helmeted driver stared at it and mocked Aram, questioning whether he was really a first-ranked player if his main skill was simply showing off. Aram looked back over his shoulder with a wide smile. He quietly admitted that provoking his opponent's emotions was incredibly easy, and revealed that he had been planning something since earlier. The driver's anger intensified, exposing rows of sharp teeth as he growled. The boost indicator on his vehicle immediately reached maximum. Flames erupted around the car, and a system notification confirmed that the skill's activation condition had been fulfilled. With a devastating burst of energy, the red car charged forward through the light. Hyuna, sitting nearby, quickly covered her ears. She watched in confusion and called Aram's name before desperately begging him not to kill the driver. The red car continued charging directly toward Aram at full speed. The demon driver screamed for Aram to be crushed and die, questioning whether he had gone completely crazy for trying to block the attack. A system box appeared. Counter-Strike. The passive ability was described as destroying the opponent's attack and returning it with double its original power. Aram braced himself and blocked the vehicle's front bumper with his giant sword, sending blinding sparks across the area. His expression remained calm as he acknowledged that his attempt might seem useless, then coldly asked whether this was really all the speed his opponent could produce. The provocation enraged the demon driver further as he cursed and pushed harder against Aram's sword. The vehicle's power indicator reached its absolute peak, maximum power mode. The collision between the two forces created a gigantic shockwave that swept across the ground and shattered a massive nearby building. Thick smoke and dust rose into the sky. Pedestrians stared at the destruction in horror, screaming and questioning what had caused the explosion before urging each other to run. Amid the swirling dust, Hyuna covered her face with her arm and anxiously wondered whether Aram had actually lost the clash of power. She then stared around in shock, saying that she had almost been scared to death and asking what had happened and whether the attacker had been another ranker. The scene shifted to a severely destroyed bridge, with smoke rising into the air. Aram eventually sat exhausted on the ground, still holding his giant sword. The weapon was now shattered. Aram looked at it and realized that his weapon had broken as well. He then acknowledged that his opponent had indeed managed to withstand his attack. Aram stared at his destroyed blade and noted that if they were still inside the game, the sword would have been completely indestructible. Half of his face covered in shadow, Aram slowly stood up and looked toward the red demon-helmeted driver who remained on his vehicle. He told the driver that choosing to continue had been incredibly stupid. The driver stared in shock, pointing out that Aram's weapon had already been destroyed. Surrounded by a dark aura, Aram smirked and explained that the destruction of his weapon was exactly what allowed him to activate another skill. He pulled out a new, dark, jagged weapon. A system window appeared. Special class skill, Berserk. The activation condition was displayed. Weapon must be destroyed, player must be on the verge of death. Another system window appeared, announcing a temporary class change. Class change, Butcher, the red driver, broke into a cold sweat and crossed two knives in front of his chest, producing a sharp clink. He then asked if they could begin. Aram's eyes glowed red within the dark aura as he gripped his new weapon and smiled menacingly. He answered that for him, this was a battle of speed. A large system panel appeared once again, confirming Aram's temporary class change to Butcher